All right, so I've built up my speed painting on top of my mixer brush. And this way I can control the color. I can control a lot of these features. The texture, the edges, just because I'm painting with colors I'm selecting myself, even though I'm only painting at a low resolution. Now that color mixing dynamic, it can help in some areas, and then when it comes to like really trying to control what you're doing, it's going to become a liability. Because it's hard to really predict just by pin pressure which color you're using in your foreground or background. So when you're ready to be done with it, you just turn that off in your brush presets. But right now I still want that kind of color variation in all this fur. And if you want just slightly less color variation, like you're doing a highlight area, you can just swap the foreground and background and make them a little bit more similar. But it's another way of kind of mixing colors together. Now this is really just diving into digital painting as opposed to digital coloring, which is all, this is all about kind of full spectrum, using lots of different colors. I can even throw blues in there, purples in there, mess with it a little bit. Give me a full, interesting range of color. And I love the fur on bears just because they have all these yellows and reds to them. And then the kind of harder textures of them, like their paws, their noses, could even have some blues and greens mixed in. And this shows just a lot of contrast between digital coloring, where you're filling in first with just flat colors for every local color, and then just working to modify those with duotone or with color holds on top. This takes a lot longer, but it's just a very different kind of art form. But without those outlines that we have in digital coloring, we have to be really mindful as we're building these shapes to also make sure that our edges are communicating the forms correctly. All right, so you can see how that speed painting's building up. So these are my painting marks so far, and with the mixer brush added in, I've got a pretty nicely roughed in painting of my bear. I need more on this leg, and I need to do more to get the structure to come through. All right. In these areas. For right now, I'll just leave it really faint. Okay. So I'm going to turn off my brush color dynamics. And I like that you can set it all up and then just turn them on and off in that brush menu. And as you save your Photoshop file, it should save all your brush presets as well for that Photoshop file. And now I'm going to focus a little bit more on the edges of the anatomy. And just make sure the lights and the shadows are telling the story I want it to tell. Every once in a while, you'll need to let your brush catch up with you. It takes a lot of processing, especially when you're using customized brushes. And we have so many brush strokes, your history is almost irrelevant because it's just all brush tool. And that's why I separate out things on layers, because if I end up making a mistake and I am painting on the wrong thing, you can't have the computer practically remember enough history states to make that right. Also, when you're doing your speed painting, you want to pay attention to the light source, kind of where light's coming from. Light's spilling around this bear. He's backlit. And it shows off his fur really nicely. But sometimes that color is a little brighter yellow, sometimes it's a little bit bluer at the edge. And I want to be able to show that with my brushwork. Comes around the ears. And of course you can make your own creative decisions with color as well. That's why we're painting it. Get to be impressionist with our color choices. His eyes in the reference are also just far too dark, so I'm going to be lightening those up and giving them a little bit more personality, hopefully. And the limitations of photo reference, a photo can very seldom do everything well. It's often having to make sacrifices. So this photo is great at kind of the full body gesture, this little wave, and this fun body language, but it's not great at the individual expression on the face. And so I want to bring that out in my digital painting, because in painting, of course, the only limits are your ability. Okay, so as I keep refining my painting, I start to take my opacity down more and more so that I keep blending and mixing the colors together. And I want to make sure I get in these deep shadows, separating out the different parts of the anatomy. And I steal colors from my own choices as much as possible. But I can also, of course, steal from the photo. And I like that that middle gray is showing through. It kind of keeps me aware of my color choices if I'm going lighter or darker than middle gray. And it definitely keeps me using a more balanced palette than if I started with just white behind everything, because that just throws everything off. But a benefit of throwing up the white behind everything is that it shows me a little bit more clearly where I haven't really made any strong decisions yet, and the middle gray is just showing through. You never really observe something closely until you've tried to paint it. And to make a successful digital painting, you can't ignore the areas that aren't as interesting, right? You really have to give your full attention to every part of it. That's called having a level of finish. But it's getting there. It's getting there. So at this stage, I wouldn't really call this speed painting anymore. I'm building my edges, and I'm always asking myself, well, is it lighter or darker on that side of the edge? And which direction should my brush strokes be if I'm trying to match the fur? And this is really refined. And once I've filled in all these gray spots, then I might even go onto a new layer and build up on top of that. Because every time I make it a new layer, I can play with the opacity, I can play with the blending mode. It gives me more options. And then if I make mistakes, I can always walk it back. Because remember, history states are not able to remember all these steps, all of these complexities. They just don't have all the processing power to remember every brushstroke you make in the memory. It'd be nice. And just once I finish this section of the neck, I think I'll be ready for that step. Go on to my refined line layer, or refined brushes. And you notice at this step too, I can turn off my basic shapes. They've informed what I want them to inform. And I can always turn them back on if I need more guidance. But what you're working towards is just a painting that's only your brush strokes. And then I'm going to get into the details of the mouth and the eyes and the claws and some of these areas that aren't just so soft. But you do as much as you can loosely and generally before you get into details. Otherwise, it will just take you forever. And if you want to move in, once we get into details, I'm going to be using this navigator a lot more to zoom in and move around and work on it. And though from a distance it might look like it's pretty together, when you get up close, especially with what the mixer brush does, you can see there's not a whole lot of refinement to it. There's just really good color selections. So it's up to us now to refine this and make it into something that we like. All right. Just fill in a little bit more of these areas. I need the lightness around the mouth. Anywhere that this middle gray is showing through, I want to make some decisions. Steal some of this purple for the nose. Remember, the way you can blend colors is to just steal colors from yourself and then with the low opacity, just paint them over. Even though my brush is a fairly hard brush, just having close values painted over the top of each other is going to give me a lot of that illusion of softness. And the reason we have the navigator up there is we really do want to see what it looks like from a distance. In many ways, for digital art, that's more important than what the details look like up close. If you look at any pre-production art, it's painted very fast to look good from a distance.